What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the broadcast. This is episode 17. Today we're going to be talking about The Mandalorian. We're going to be talking about working from home, and we're going to be talking a little bit about why the news is always so bad. If you haven't had a chance yet, like, subscribe, share. It definitely helps, and I really appreciate it. It's good to be back. Happy Monday, everyone. It's kind of a dreary day outside. As you can see, cleaned up my beard a little bit. I'm digging it. We're going to keep it going a little bit for the winter. I don't know how long I'm going to let it get. Definitely not as long as last year, but we're going to keep it a lot more trim this year. So hopefully we'll get right into it, and we'll see where this lovely beard ends up. But with that being said, let's jump into some of our topics today. So the first thing that's been on my mind is a huge, I guess, thing that I'm part of in terms of like a fandom is like I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. A lot of people don't know that. Some people do. That, by the way, is the Millennium Falcon. If you hadn't had a chance, it's a Lego creation, right? Um, and what we actually have coming up on Friday is actually the Mandalorian show put on by Disney. I think that is probably one of the best Star Wars shows that has ever been done. Perhaps I think it's actually the only Star Wars show, live action wise, that's ever been done. Not counting the movies, of course, but they're movies, they're not shows. And it's so cool. It's such a great take on the universe. It opens up so many different doors, so many alleys they can go down. The storytelling is brilliant. The cinematography is so cool. The sound design is just incredible. I love it, and the characters are memorable. They're cool. You can get into them. You can kind of figure out what they're going to do, what they're going to say before they do. They play their characters really well. There's no super defined, ultra powerful people. There's no everyone has like character flaws, which makes it super interesting. And of course, Baby Yoda, so you can't pass that up. You know, that's pretty cool. But the story itself is the reason I find it so compelling. And if you hadn't had a chance to watch the first season, highly recommend check it out. It is so good. Feel free to binge watch it. Again, the season 2 actually starts this Friday, and I am so excited to start getting into it. But basically, season 1, I will keep spoilers out of this discussion. But for season 1, the whole context of the story is that it's really a story about fatherhood, right? And that's what was cool to me, because it's a story you rarely see, actually. A lot of times you hear a lot of stories that are really about, like a hero's journey or something like that, or, perhaps a mother protecting her children. And this story is a little bit different. You basically have, a character who's only cared about himself, who's only done everything his way, who's only had to worry about who he is, and has only ever had to worry about his concerns and how he's going to take himself to the next point in life. And he's never had to worry about anyone else, right? And then through his daily job and his routine, he gets thrust upon him an opportunity to basically help someone, and he gets this child kind of thrust on him by his choice, right? He could continue to be this self-serving lowlife that essentially does things on his own and doesn't care about anyone else but himself, but he has the opportunity to change his life around and make a difference in the world. And he does. He takes the burden of caring for this child, this Baby Yoda, if you will, onto him. And it's really cool to see a character like that who's never gone to do anything, right? To help another person and another character grow that he knows nothing about. It's like someone who has never been a father, who knows nothing about being a father, is now a father, and has to take care of this secondary character. And it's a very cool story. It's cool to see how the character grows, being this person that knows nothing about anything, and you see him grow and kind of learn more and more as the story progresses. But the interesting part is he starts out and he takes on this mantle of fatherhood, of taking care of this Baby Yoda, if you will. And it's like, because he knows nothing, he goes off of what he feels is right. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, right? I think, and I'm not someone who, has any kids, but hopefully someday, if I'm so lucky, if I'm so blessed to be able to have kids, I'd love to have some in the future. But it's like, that is probably something that a lot of parents go through, where it's like, okay, this is our first kid, and it's like, okay, what do you do? How do you take care of this child? Who knows? You kind of go off some instincts, and I think we all, and I guess the crux of what I'm saying is, I think we all have some parental instincts within us that probably get activated at certain amounts of time, and it's kind of cool to see that in the show, right? You take someone who ends up still kind of being self-serving, and you progress his character to where he now has to take care of this child, and he puts everything on the line for it. And it's cool. He makes, friends and characters along the way, and the story progresses, and you get to a point where I'm super excited to see how season 2 plays out. But the idea is, okay, now that he's had this child, he has to deliver this child to his people, right? And he has to figure out where's this child going to end up? How do I get him home? And it's like, okay, now you have the continuation of the journey. It's like, okay, you protected him, but now you have to deliver him. So it's cool to see where that's going to end up, and I'm very excited to take a watch Friday. Again, highly, highly, highly recommend you check it out. Mandalorian, it's amazing. Now, moving on to a few of our other topics today, I believe we're going to chat about working from home and why the news is always bad, right? So let's take why the news is always bad first, and then let's talk about working from home in just a second. So this is going to be more of a quicker topic. The working from home piece might be a little bit longer, but the whole why the news is always bad is something that I've been thinking about more and more lately. And it's like, how many times do you actually hear stories that are good, that are kind of like heartwarming, that were like, this person did something and it paid off and everyone's happy? You don't really hear those stories. And the interesting part is, it's not that they don't exist. It's that the news doesn't show you those stories. The news is really no different than everyday life. It's kind of like my life and your life. Whether we like it or not, our lives are probably boring to some degree. It doesn't matter if you're out skydiving, living like a billionaire on a yacht. To some degree, your life is probably boring, right? That's reality. That's the real world. That's what people don't understand at this point in time. It's not always this sensationalized, epic story that's going on 24/7, right? And the worst comment, I hate reading the subtitles, bombshell, bombshell, bombshell. I hate reading that because it's rarely a bombshell of anything. It's rarely a story of any value. But back to what I'm saying is that there's really no sensationalization in everyday life. And that's how really the news should be, in my opinion. It should be pretty objective. It should really just say what's going on, and it shouldn't try to create news when there is none. It should report on stories, and it should be kind of boring. You ever watch C-SPAN? I don't think anyone does. I would rather watch paint dry, but that's reality. That's actually where some of the craziest stuff happens in our government. And I'm not talking purely from a political stance. I'm talking from just a general everyday life stance. You even see weathermen today. They're trying to make these big storms and hurricanes much bigger than they are sometimes. Now, obviously, weather safety is very important, and I highly recommend you listen to them. But it's like, at the end of the day, if you've been through a thunderstorm, it's probably not going to be the end of the world if another one comes. It's like all news, all these news stations, right? They switched to this 24-hour news cycle, and it never used to be like that. It used to be, you have your AM stories, you have your PM stories, and then you have late night shows. And that was kind of how it was for a very long time. But then in the early 2000s, we switched to kind of like a 24-hour news cycle where these news companies, and I make sure we say that very specifically, these news companies, and we'll get into that in a second, have to prepare news that is kind of on a rotating basis, 24 hours. Well, going back to what I said earlier, life is pretty boring. There's not always a sensationalized story to talk about. And what do? They sensationalize headlines. They unnecessarily rile up people to get them excited about it, to get them to want to watch. That's how they make their money. These are companies. These are not non-for-profit businesses. These companies are in it to make money, and they make money off of you by Every time you get excited, you click on a story. That's ad revenue from their website. That's ad revenue from their YouTube channels. That's ad revenue from commercials on TV. Every time you are excited, they are taking money out of your pocket. And there's not a single news station that doesn't do this. This is completely bipartisan, apolitical, if you will. News stations today are, they make money off of you being excited, which is why it pays to have sensationalized headlines. It pays to have sensationalized news. It pays to have an angry public. They are lying to you. Now, I'm not here to say fake news this, fake news that. That is not the context of what I'm saying. What I am saying specifically is that the world's news, the U.S. news at least, everyday life, how it should be reported, is quite boring. There's not really a lot that's going on that needs to be sensationalized. And they drive up hype when it is unneeded to get you to react. So every time you see a headline like this, just remember, they are literally taking money out of your pocket. They are literally using you. And to me, at least, that makes me feel really bad. It makes me feel kind of disgusted, you know. I don't like that. It's unfortunate that we're at this place where we as people need to almost have a sensationalized story to get by, you know. When was the last time you read the news? And going back to what I originally said, you heard something that was like, oh, you know, this, and that happened. That was great. You really don't hear that. It's always negative. And this is the second piece to why, after they sensationalize it, it's a sensationalized story that's a negative story, okay? It's negative because people are more predispositioned to click on something if they don't like it. I know this is crazy, but what I mean by this is if it's a headline that they agree with already, okay, then they're likely to potentially click on that source. And that sounds slightly different from what I said, but stay with me for a second, right? But if you look at people, most people will listen to the news stations that they are aligned to, right? And it's like those news stations are just producing article after article, story after story that fits the narrative that they're trying to present, okay? And those narratives generally, instead of reporting things, are negative because they want to bash the other side, which fits your certain perceptions that you get from watching those specific stations, okay? The reason it pays to run these stories because they're negative is it gets people angry. That's what they want from you. They want you to be angry. They want you to be riled up. They want you to type in the comment section. That shows that they're making money. That shows that they're valuable to society. They don't want you to just live your life and forget about it and think that it's really not that big of a deal, which most stories are. They're really not that big of a deal. They want you to be angry so they can make that money. That's why they don't run positive stories, because it doesn't pay. That doesn't mean they don't exist. There's so many stories out there of people doing amazing, amazing, brilliant things. And we don't hear about them. And we suffer as a population because of that. The world is not a nice place, but it's indifferent most of the time. There are some people out there to get you. They really are. It's really hard to argue against that, which I'm not doing. But what I'm saying is most of the time in life, the hardest truth for people to understand is the world is indifferent. They don't care about you. They don't care for you. It just is. And that's kind of like life. That's how the news should be. Unfortunately, it's not. But at the end of the day, just remember, if you're getting angry over news articles, if you're getting frustrated because all you're seeing is negative things, it's because they want you to be that way. They don't want you to think freely about things. They don't want you to use your brain. They don't want to just give you the facts, because the facts won't agitate you enough to click, like, subscribe, to repost, to say something nasty, to listen to the next article that they have. That's why. So just remember that next time you're watching the news or reading the news. If you're getting frustrated, don't let them take advantage of you. It's hard to do. They mask articles these days as real news a lot of times. And it's funny, these companies, they have these ad slots that they allow different companies to buy into, where they'll write an article that's like news, but it'll be an ad for something else. That's a whole nother story of how they basically sell ads to you as news these days, which is that's even, I don't think it's worse, but it's equally as bad, you know. But watch out for these news places. My recommendation, the antidote to this, is truth. That is the antidote behind most things. But the way to get around it is to go to independent journalists, and not just one. There's no primary source. There's no right source. I'm not going to recommend you any, because it doesn't do any good for you to hear something from me. You have to find them on your own, right? And the only thing I'm going to recommend you is the idea of big box news. All the major telecommunication companies that have the giant news stations, they are dying, and they're not going to be in existence soon enough. So find those independent journalists, find the ones you can trust, and start, you know, boning up on what they're saying, because I guarantee you're going to get a purer stream of information than you would if you would listen to what the folks with these big companies have to say. So that's all I'm going to talk about in terms of why the news is always bad. Now, the second piece to this is the last topic, I suppose, for today is we're going to talk about working from home a bit. Okay, this is a fun topic. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and it's kind of interesting. You know, we are definitely at a time that I don't think has happened, at least not in my lifetime, ever before the internet was developed, right? There's been times when people have quarantined before, and there's been times when we've quarantined, even in some areas, you know, even after the internet was developed. But the interesting part is it's never been for this long at this large of a scale. Now, we're not talking about coronavirus today in general, but we are going to be talking about what the implications of working from home are going to be now. And this is why it's so interesting, because you went from this idea that all of the time you had to work in the office. You had to never be remote. And this is most companies, I'm generalizing. Some companies did allow 24-hour work from home, but it was not generally on the benefit of the employee. It was more so to save money for the company, or to allow the employee to meet the client's needs at infrequent hours or at different locations, right? Those were the primary reasons prior to the whole pandemic why someone would be allowed to work from home. It was very rare, actually, that you had a company that would allow you to work remotely as needed just because, okay? And that's a very old school way of looking at things. And I've said this before, but the wave and direction of where we're going in the future is really working remote more and more, if not indefinitely, okay? The whole idea that we're going to be at a company going forward is kind of a moot point. And the reason for that is multifaceted, right? The first part is security reasons, okay? If you're at a company, you know, there's a possibility that you could potentially access information that you shouldn't be allowed to if you are on site, okay? And then the second reason is obviously, which is the reason some of us are still working remote today, is more medical reasons, right? Like if there's a virus going on, if someone has something, if they're ill, perhaps they just have a disability that they need to be taken care of. Well, allowing these folks to work from home means a company doesn't have to pay for, you know, the issue of a certain large population of their staff getting sick. A company doesn't have to pay for reasonable accommodations and modifications if you have a disabled person. A company doesn't have to worry about you because you're in the vicinity of your own home, okay? And they don't have to pay for your physical space, a desk, your power you're being consumed from the outlets. They don't have to pay for your comfort, which most companies do to a very small degree. And by comfort, I mean providing you with a desk, a chair, you know, some lights, a place to work, things like that, power strip, internet. You are responsible for that. So actually the companies themselves are making money off of you working from home, okay? And the question becomes, well, what happens to all these giant buildings a lot of these large corporations have had, or smaller companies, right? What does happen to them? And the answer really is, if these companies were smart, they would start downsizing now, not by people, but by building. You don't need this large infrastructure system you used to have. That's not how the future is going to be. Any company that is making big bets on that is going to lose, right? It's quite interesting, right? A lot of times you see in big metropolitan areas a mixed-use development where there's a lot of folks that have their homes, townhomes, apartments, sometimes homes, next to larger buildings, sometimes skyscrapers, but it's all the same really. At the end of the day, they're just workspaces. They're not places where people live, but they're close enough to places where people live where they're mixed in the same building. But the interesting part is, if you could imagine a future where everyone's working from home or primarily working from home, what would happen to all of those office buildings? A lot of times they would go away, which means you'd free up space. You could either reconvert them to places where people could live, or you could just get rid of them and put parks there, which is great. Now, I'm not saying or advocating for the destruction of buildings, because that may cost more in the long term, depending upon how you do it. But what I am advocating for is the idea that we may not need any more buildings if we large corporate buildings, that is, if we plan this properly, right? Because the idea would be, how do we make our employees the most comfortable so that they maximize their profits? And letting them work from home is a very valuable way to do that. Making people go to an office where they lose an hour in commute each day, sometimes 2 or 3 if you're traveling, and especially if you're going through traffic, making them pay for food on site or at a restaurant nearby, which is expensive, putting them in a situation where they're getting bothered by coworkers or brought into meetings that are unnecessary, putting them in an environment a lot of times where they feel uncomfortable. These are all things that are going to detract from an employee's productivity. And what a company should measure itself by, and how well an employee is doing, is not what they are doing, but what the value they are providing to the company, right? How much value is this employee providing? That is what we should be paying them. That's another discussion, but the point is, the value an employee provides for a company is correlated strongly with the productivity that they have, right? So the idea is that the more productivity you can give an employee, the more flexibility you give them, the happier they are, the more they're going to work for you, the better they're going to work, and the better their work product is going to be. So there's almost no argument anymore for a continued workplace involvement with all employees where there's no work from home as an option. There's no reason to have that ever again. Not to mention the companies are saving on electricity and power at a lot of these facilities. That's a big cost when you take into a large company like this. For a small home, electricity may be peanuts, but remember, when you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people gathered together, that adds up to a lot of money, especially if you've got any IT infrastructure, which is eating up God knows how much power, and electricity, energy, all those things. So the idea is, working from home is something we're going to see more and more. But the interesting part is, I think we're going to see kind of a counter push to this once COVID starts loosening up, right? And what I mean by this is, I think we're going to see a lot of companies that have been like, okay, now that we've worked from home, everyone back into the office, we got to, make sure we never do that again. But that's the wrong approach, right? What they should do is allow an interim period between working from home, back in the office, and allow employees the flexibility to either elect to work from home, because we've already proven that can be done successfully. And by the way, as a side note, if your company has productivity that has gone down from work from home, my recommendation is to fire those employees because they are not being productive. Anyone who is good at what they do, who cares about their job and their workplace, is going to be incredibly productive if they're working from home. Now, in the rare case that they're not, it's likely because their home environment is not conducive to creating more value for the company, right? There might be something that they don't have in their home, right? Now for me, if you can see, this is where I work. In front of me is my computer, and I work right off my desktop with VDI. I love it. I love it so much better than working off a laptop. I got this powerful computer that I can run everything from. It's snappy, boom, boom, boom. I can, do things a lot faster. I've got a lot of intrinsic beauty in my room, in a sense that, like, I have a few pieces around here. You don't see them all. that I find very appealing to the eye. And that drives up a lot of creativity for me. That helps me create things, which is part of my job. I don't get that at work, okay? No, I do get energized by being around people, and there's something to be said about that. But the point of what I'm getting is you have to focus on how productive your employees are, right? So forcing everyone to come back to the office is a bad move. It's a real bad move. What you should do is start allowing people to come back as necessary. See who comes back. I think if you allowed people to say, okay, come in the office if you want, you might find that most of your workforce really doesn't want to work in the office. And that's okay, as long as their productivity stays high and their value creation stays high as well. Because what you're going to see is if you force those people to come back, you're going to take a hit on productivity and value. People are used to working from home now, and this is the beauty of it. There's not going to be any more, okay, what are the working from home hours in this company? No. That is a necessity from now on. And that's twofold. It's a necessity because we don't know what the next virus over the hill is that's going to come and hurt everyone. And that means we need to be prepared to quarantine again, just like we have now. So that's the first part. And the second part is this new generation of workers, these not even millennials anymore. We're old folks now. Gen Z is just starting to get into the workforce, which is brilliant. And it's like they're going to grow up with this idea that working from home is standard. This is what they're growing up in. Just like us as millennials, we grew up with the internet. You know, we learned from a very young age, and it was something always there. Now, we didn't grow up in the idea of like of the way social media is now, where everything is so quick. We were at the onset of that, how things were slow and clunky and didn't work so well. Everyone can remember MySpace. That was a nice big dumpster fire of a website. But and then Facebook, you know, that's still it's good for staying in touch with people. I deleted mine years ago, but it's pretty archaic in the way it looks at things, right? Facebook's offshot. As a side note, Facebook actually owns Instagram. A lot of people don't know that. But that was much more popular, right? And that's a different way of communicating. You communicate through pictures and primarily versus just text to God knows who in Facebook. But the point is, where I'm getting at this is Gen Z has grown up with the idea now, because of COVID, that working from home is not an option. It is a commonplace solution to how the workplace functions, okay? So that means companies need to be competitive, and if they want the best talent, they're going to need to offer that not as a benefit, but as a guarantee. And I want to see more companies push for that, right? I'm so tired of seeing companies that are so wary about working from home, this, that, or the other. That's so old school, that's so unproductive. It's not how we're going to see everything be. I would be surprised if there's many companies that exist within the next 5 years that don't allow some function or form of working from home. And obviously I don't mean like grocery store workers or, you know, people who work at Starbucks. Not that there's anything wrong with those jobs. In fact, I would love to know how to make a damn good cup of coffee. I don't, and I'm such a huge coffee drinker that it makes me sad. But the point is, we need to allow people to work from home. We need to allow them to be happy where they are. We're focusing so much effort on making the workplace better so people are happy there. And it's like, where are you most happy? You're happy in your home. There's really nothing else to say about that. So don't be surprised if you see companies start offering that as a standard practice. What I would recommend to every company out there is allow people to come back to the office if you can, if it's safe, with some form of social distancing in place, with some restrictions. I would definitely never call back my whole workforce in at this point in time because I think it's too dangerous. Even if there's no current plague that's going on, if you will. I mean, just the flu. I mean, how quick does that spread? I mean, you could have a whole bunch of your workforce out of order in a very short time just by how close most people are. You know, it's very unlikely that we live in a place where we have offices now. That's something that's not as common anymore. Most of the time people are packed in together. And there is some offices. I'm not saying it's not common, but what I'm saying is most of the time desks are closer, and that's just because that was kind of like a function of the whole agile movement that said, okay, people collaborate better, and that's another topic entirely. And, great topic. We'll talk about that agile in a future episode, I promise, and how that's kind of like gotten into the entire corporate world, if you will. But we got to have companies that bring people back as they want to come back. Okay, and then if they do require it, if they're unwilling to pass some continuous work from home at some point in time, only require your employees to come in during half the week. Seriously. Again, watch the productivity and value. That's the most important metric. Everything else is pointless. What you should be focusing on, in addition to that, is making sure that your virtual communication network, whether you use Zoom, highly don't recommend it, it's owned by the Chinese, Teams, Microsoft product. Microsoft's becoming like the underdog tech company these days. It's kind of crazy. I'm actually a bigger Microsoft fan than I ever have been in my life. And we're seeing things like Teams actually take over, and it's a very safe way, it's secure, and it's a homegrown solution. But products like this, Google has a new option, Google Meetings or something like that they just offered. But products like this that allow you to collaborate and communicate virtually 24/7, where you can talk over a webcam and you learn, socialize, and things like that. That's where we need to see companies investing. No more in the physical infrastructure. We need to invest in the virtual infrastructure. And again, if we don't do that, those companies are probably going to be underwater in the next 5 years. So that's it today. Hope everyone enjoyed. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, share. Every time it helps. I love chatting with you, and I would love to hear from you guys tomorrow. Happy Monday.